Alright, so first let's talk about how humans can be affected by excess nitrogen. So as you can see, there's a bunch of different effects that come along with this. So we're only going to look at a couple. So one major effect is how nitrate in the atmosphere is going to affect humans. So how does this happen? We see that there are nitrifying bacteria inside the soil here, these purple dots right here, and they're converting NO3- into NO2-, aka nitrite. And so if this nitrite gets into the atmosphere, it can interact with the air and stick around for a while. And if this NO2- sticks around in the air for a while and people come along and they're just outside doing their thing, not worrying about anything, they won't know that this NO2- is in the atmosphere because it's colorless and odorless, so they won't even know. But if the dosage is high enough, we can see that it can cause serious illness and even death. So this person has the highest dosage, so they aren't going to live. And then if we go down a little bit, this person only has a minor dosage, a smaller one right here. So maybe they're only going to get asthma. And then even a smaller dosage, maybe they're just going to get a small rash. Because remember, the higher the dosage, there are greater health effects. Alright, so let's move on to how excess nitrogen is going to affect animals. Beginning with terrestrial animals, we're going to talk in terms of nitrate and also nitrite. Alright, so I have a drawing here, and let's just run through it. So you have crops over here with a high nitrogen concentration, and then grass over here with a low one. And so let's see how nitrogen can get from over here to over here. So say we were to have rain or something, some of this nitrogen that is just in the crops that doesn't get taken up by the plants is able to run off the surface and can be transferred over into this grass where we don't want it. Okay, so then this grass can now have a high nitrogen concentration in terms of nitrate and also nitrite, which can have harmful effects on the animal. So we see that if this grass has high nitrogen concentration and the cow eats the grass, if he continues to eat it, he's also increasing his body nitrogen concentration, right? So there's a couple things that can happen. First, they can just die just from the high nitrogen concentration in their body. But also, it can suffocate them. So let's move on to oxygen, how this can affect oxygen transport via insufficient. Alright, so this is how insufficient oxygen transport happens. So we have a red blood cell right here. And if we zoom in, it has lots of hemoglobin within it to help transport oxygen. So in a normal case scenario where there is lots of oxygen present, we see that oxygen will bind to the active site within this hemoglobin. So when this binding happens, the person is able to breathe and they are very happy. Okay? But let's talk about in the chance of high nitrogen concentration. So we see that here's our hemoglobin again, and we see that there's lots of tiny little nitrogen or nitrate or nitrite in the system here, and it's overpowering the oxygen. And since this substrate is the same general shape as the oxygen, it is also able to bind to the hemoglobin, but this binding inhibits any oxygen transport, causing the person to suffocate. So then here, if we increase the nitrogen concentration even higher, you're going to get even less oxygen transport. So again, the dosage determines how badly this affects the person. And so now we're going to move on to marine animals and how nitrogen will affect them. So recent evidence suggests that arthropods can be affected in terms of secreting their reproductive hormones, and it can be affected by nitrogen. So let's have a look at it. Okay, so I have a quick drawing here of how exactly the secretion of this hormones is inhibited. Okay, So it's kind of the same idea as before when we looked at the terrestrial animals along with their hemoglobin. So here we have a normal enzyme that is involved in hormone secretion. So this normal enzyme, again, has an active site that a substrate will bind to. So in normal terms, when the proper substrate binds to the enzyme, creating this proper enzyme-substrate complex, reproductive hormones are secreted and the animal will do just fine. But in high nitrogen concentration, we see that inside the arthropods, this N is going to be oxidized into nitric oxide. So here we have this normal enzyme again, but this time we have NO being bound to this enzyme, creating an improper enzyme substrate complex. And so this inhibits the secretion of the hormones, and the animal is unable to reproduce and eventually maybe die. So now that we looked at the arthropods, let's move on and talk about how this can create algal blooms. Okay, so here's my drawing of a lake system here. And so we see in the middle of the lake there was this large algal bloom, or also known as eutrophication. So let's see how this affects the whole aquatic system here. So we know that with all the cyanobacteria and algae on top of the lake, less UV light is going to get absorbed by the photosynthetic plants that are at the bottom of the lake, because most of it is being taken in by this cyanobacteria or being reflected. So that's this part right here. And also, in cases of high nitrogen, there is also a low oxygen concentration in the water because this cyanobacteria, an algal bloom here, is taking in all of the oxygen, as well as microorganisms that are decomposing these dead cyanobacteria that have already died are also taking in most of the oxygen. So when this oxygen level decreases low enough, it can cause fish kills. So we see here this fish is dead, and so is this one, and a couple more here. So we see that our fish population is very, very low, with just 2 remaining. So that is also another serious issue with increased nitrogen in the aquatic system. And as well, cyanobacteria are very well known to create toxins that are extremely harmful, especially to mammals. So here we see that it's secreting toxins over here and some over here and everything. And so say a human was to come, or a cow or some kind of livestock was to come and drink this water, they could get seriously ill from the toxins that are within this aquatic system. So again, there are lots of problems involved in high nitrogen concentrations. And here these are just some descriptions of different types of toxins that are produced by certain types of cyanobacteria, and where exactly they are effect in the mammals, where they take effect in the mammals. So microcystins they target the liver in mammals, and these kind of cyanobacteria secrete them, just for extra information.